Hi class, it's Miss Miller. Today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the text Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes one last time. One last time. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at it with a specific purpose, and that purpose is going to be to address the prompt. The prompt specifically says, how does Charlie balance the superego with the id, and how is that the primary conflict in the text? We're going to look at that today, and I'm going to have the text outlined for you. I've highlighted it with the different types of the human conscience in there. So the first color is going to be the id, then we're going to see the superego, and then the ego. And so that's going to be super important for you, okay? When you're taking your Cornell notes today, I want you to look at the subtitles that I have in the video. And when you do the notes, you can write those subtitles on the left-hand side. And then my talk or my discussion, you should write on the right-hand side. Now, I will go ahead and put this PDF of the entire document with all the annotated notes on there for you, and you can get that under the reading material of our website. Okay, so if you can't keep up with the notes during the lecture, just listen to it, but then you can also have a copy. I did it for the first like 8 or 9 pages of this particular reading. Okay, let's go. In the very first part of the text, and I've highlighted it here in yellow for you, it's line 4. It says, I want to be smart. This is Charlie speaking. He is expressing his most inner basic desire. In this point, he is functioning in the state of the id. Now, in this part of the text, we can see there's a couple of things that stand out. The term scared. Charlie is scared, right, of failing. So this is our first sign of struggle. We actually have to take some of the diction or the word choice to help us determine this. This scared implies the struggle. And then further along over to the right, you see I've circled it. It says trying very hard. So we can see the struggle that he has. He's in the id. He wants to be smart. It's really important to him, and it's very challenging. It's very difficult. We also see Charlie's eagerness to please. This doesn't come easy for Charlie to actually perform. And this is where we start to see the initial stages of his actual struggle. In this very short excerpt, we see several things happening here. And I highlighted in yellow the very first one. It says, all my life I wanted to be smart and not dumb. So again, going back to the first page, if we connected, we see this whole conflict is reinforced. This is all he wants. There's nothing more that the text talks about but him wanting to be smart, him becoming smart, and then losing that, right? So all my life I wanted to be smart. And then so here he is in that id, in that very basic desire, but it's very hard. It's a struggle, right? And now here is his opportunity to achieve his desire. And we see here it says, I don't care if it hurts. He will stop at nothing. It doesn't matter what it takes. I want to be smart. So here he is in the id. I want to be smart. I don't care what it takes. Now further down, you'll see the arrow over to the right, and I have a big star that says superego, and it says, I said, why should I make up lies? I never tell lies anymore because I always get caught. Now here's the struggle, because we know that Charlie wants nothing more to be smart, but he's taking a test, and now it's like a second portion of the test where he's doing the examination with this woman, and she eventually becomes frustrated with him. But we see the struggle. Here's his opportunity. He wants nothing more. He doesn't care if it hurts. But here it is that she's asking him to just sort of be make-believe. She's not really asking him to lie, but just sort of pretend, improvise. But he takes it so literally, he can't even do that. So he feels it's a lie. And so here is said what he's not willing to do. I said, why should I make up lies? I never tell lies anymore because I always get caught. So there is this struggle right here. And then he's decided, I'm not going to tell any lies. He's not willing to make that compromise. And so we know that he desperately wants to pass, but he is conflicted with this deliberation or deliberately telling the lie. So if you look here, I highlighted, I didn't see. So I'm gonna be in the shoes of Charlie. I didn't see how we could have had the same amaze if Algernon had a box and I had a paper, but I didn't say nothing. Anyway, there wasn't time because the race started. One of the men had a watch and he was trying to hide so I wouldn't see it. So I tried not to look, and that made me nervous. And so when I see that, the struggle here is that he lacks the capacity to understand that it's not everything is so literal. Again, it's the primary conflict, obviously, because the test can potentially keep him from his desire. And, to be honest, when I did that role here, this reminded me of one of Steinbeck's other novels, George and Lenny, where it was Of Mice and Men. And this is the exact same role that George played in Steinbeck's other novel, Of Mice and Men. So I just thought that was interesting, where you have this character who's just not very bright, and he's got his obsession with mental illness. So the whole psychoanalysis, you see it in other texts. It's a side rail, but I wanted to take that detour to point that out. And I didn't know that until I got into the role. But you can see his desperation here. He wants nothing more than to do this, and he's conflicted. He's struggling. He says, I didn't see how it could change, but he says it was a waste of time, but I didn't say anything. And then we see the second part where he says these guys had the watch on, they were timing him, but he tried not to show it. He said, so to hide, I wouldn't see it. I tried. They're gonna use me! I'm so excited! I can hardly write! That's our character Charlie, and he's in the id, right? He's in the state where he is approaching his basic desire. He's sort of lost a little bit of control, impulsive. Now, if there's any question about whether or not this is the most important, if not the primary conflict in the text, this sort of solidifies it. This conflict between Dr. Newmar and Dr. Strauss. Now, you have to read closely to see this, but these two are in conflict with each other over whether or not, guess who, whether or not Charlie should have this operation, whether or not he should have this surgery. And so their conflict sort of reinforces his conflict, and the idea that this whole thing is just a big conflict in general, and it is the primary conflict. It is what everybody's talking about. It's what Dr. Strauss is talking about or thinking about. It's what Dr. Newmar is thinking about or talking about. It's what drives our character Charlie. It's what the reason why we even see Miss Kenyon. It's all for this primary conflict, and the deciding factor here is Charlie's motivation, and I circled that for you again, his desire to do this, his state of the id. And it's interesting, I think it's ironic that they even use this person and trust his decision to go ahead and have this operation because he's not too bright. So what state is he making this decision from? And then if we look at the flip side, when he does make a decision and he's super smart and he has that intellect, he makes another decision that, I don't know if this is so important anymore, and he starts to value friendship over that. And so it's very interesting that when he's not too bright, he makes this really important decision in his life, and then when he is bright, he recognizes that perhaps it isn't the best decision after all. So. Even though he is about to have this big operation or surgery, he's still struggling to maintain a part of himself, the old Charlie. I mean, he even says, Dr. Strauss says, don't be superstitious, Charlie. This is science. Anyway, and here's where he's insistent. I'm keeping my rabbit's foot with me. He doesn't want to let go of this part. So there again shows a minor struggle, but still a struggle within itself. And then towards the end, the last couple lines, I want to be smart like other people. We see that basic id. So he's torn, like, I know I'm about to do this big surgery, and oh, I'm going to hold on to this. And that's a part of the old Charlie, because the smart Charlie isn't going to do that. Okay?
I got a headache from trying to think so much. I thought Dr. Strauss was my friend, but he don't help me. He don't tell me what to think or when I'll get smart. Miss Kenyon didn't come to see me. I think writing these progress reports are stupid, too.
So this is the first time in the text that we see him starting to really resist this process. Now, before the operation, we recall he was completely compliant. I'll do anything. I'm willing to try. I don't care if it hurts. And now, he's had the operation. As he's getting smarter, he's starting to question things. And this is a sign that perhaps he is getting more intelligent. And this also shows or illustrates the struggle between the id and the superego. Now he's got a headache from trying to think so much. I mean, this isn't going to be easy, Charlie. And so we see a lot of negatives here. He's got this headache. Now he starts to question whether or not Dr. Strauss is his friend. He doesn't tell him what to do, and he's not happy that Dr. Strauss isn't sort of prompting him. Now he's complaining that Miss Kenyon didn't come and see him, and then he's complaining like these progress reports are stupid. What's the value in it anyway? So, he did all these things because he wants to be smart, and now all of a sudden he's smart, or he's getting smarter. He's not quite smart yet, and all of a sudden he has a problem with everything. And if we remember the stark contrast before, he was extremely compliant.
Dr. Strauss came to my room tonight to see why I didn't come in like I was supposed to. I told him I don't like to race with Algernon anymore.
So here we see some resistance from Charlie again, right? He's supposed to check in with Dr. Strauss, and he's not doing that. He didn't come. He doesn't. He's doing what he feels like. So he's met his basic desire. He's not really thinking about the superego. Right now, he's doing whatever it is that he wants to do. So he's perhaps in the id. You could argue otherwise, but he's struggling. There is clearly a conflict because he insists on following his own desire. He's resisting again. Then we see later in the second part, he said, I gotta turn it in when I go to sleep. Turn it on when I go to sleep, and he's referring to the TV. I said, you're kidding. Why should I turn it on when I'm going to sleep? So he's questioning everything. Who ever heard of a thing like that? So he's starting to, and one of the things you start to teach in literature and you want kids to be able to do is to think on their own. And this is what Charlie is starting to do, and maybe this is a process, and this is a necessary process, but regardless, it's still a struggle. But he's questioning everything, which in essence is a good thing. Who ever heard of a thing like that? But he said, if I want to get smart, I got to do what he says. I told him, I don't think I was going to get smart. And he puts his hand on my shoulder and said, Charlie, you don't know it yet, but you're getting smarter all the time. In fact, Charlie questions Dr. Strauss, but Dr. Strauss even recognizes, like, the fact that he's questioning everything illustrates that he is becoming smarter, and he doesn't even realize it. So that's one step. And even for you as students, when you start to question things, that's a sign that you're thinking. And so whether or not Charlie recognizes it, he is becoming smarter. He's starting to challenge things, and that's one of the initial stages. In Charlie's March 29th entry for his progress report, he improved. We could see this entire paragraph, or two paragraphs, sort of illustrate this, but I just highlighted a few that sort of really demonstrated his resistance. But as he improves in his intelligence, he becomes increasingly resistant to what seems illogical, and he's functioning at a literal level. So he says, I think it's all crazy if you can get smart when you're sleeping. Why do people go to school? That thing I don't think will work. So we see he's getting smarter, but his vocabulary is still sort of the same. He still doesn't have all the words yet. So, but he's able to articulate at least his ideas. And his ego is fighting for control here as he thinks this. And once he acts on the ego, then he is in complete control. Again, we see Charlie just sort of resisting and challenging everything. I've told Dr. Strauss, what good is it to get smart in my sleep? I want to be smart when I awake. And he says it's the same thing, and I have two minds. So we start to see a little bit more complex ideas being expressed or shared with Charlie. This whole idea of the subconscious and the conscious, which we even discussed in class. So I call this the Crusoe Effect because we see that Charlie's reading a book and it's about another character by the name of Robin Crusoe. And clearly, this man, he may look familiar, this scenario may be familiar, but it's because Crusoe is sort of experiencing the same thing as Charlie. And so we see it's about a man who gets marooned on a desert island. And so you could almost say that Charlie is sort of now he's being sort of alienated away from his friends. He's smart and figures out all kind of things so he can have a house and food, and he's a good swimmer. So we see that Charlie is also smart. We can see this parallel between Charlie's life and Crusoe's experience in the story. And it's kind of sort of foreshadowing what's going to happen. We get to see Charlie's sentiments, how he truly feels. And we see that he says, and I should have underlined this and emphasized it, only I feel sorry because he's all alone. So we get to see how valuable that is to him. He's all alone and has no friends. So that's important to Charlie. And for the first time, we hear something different than him wanting to be smart. And so this also shows perhaps even a struggle with Charlie. But I think there must be somebody else on the island because there's a picture with a funny umbrella looking at footprints. And I hope he gets a friend and not be lonely. So remember, Charlie's already starting to resist. He's at a different state. He's not the lowest level of intelligence in this case, and we get to see that something else is valuable to him. That he starts to recognize that friendship is also important. Now, in this excerpt, you see Miss Kenyon, and she brings out a totally different side of Charlie. And so we remember this Charlie who, post operation, was resistant and challenging and questioning everything. But when Miss Kenyon comes on the scene, he's a different guy. We see the super ego. This woman here sort of changes him, or he's very sensitive towards her. And so we see that even though he still questions this whole idea of writing with punctuation, and he inquires with Miss Kenyon and she sort of takes the time to explain it, he's willing to take this on. So we see a struggle, not necessarily in this sense with the punctuation, but we see a struggle in terms of him struggling with the id and the superego, because 1 minute he's resisting and now here he's compliant once again. And so even at the end, and it's in explanation mark to end that sentence. It says punctuation is fun. We all know punctuation isn't fun, but the fact that he is willing to do all of this to keep her happy. Again, we see that person who's eager to please. The same person we saw at the very beginning of the short story, where he wanted nothing more than to be smart, and so he's happy. He's in his super ego here.
I wasn't going to write about it, but I guess I got to because it's important. Today was the first time I ever stayed home from work.
These two lines sort of indicate the superego because he says, I wasn't going to write about it, which was his basic desire, but I guess I got to because he recognizes that he needs to do this because it's important. So, and then it says, today was the first time I ever stayed home from work. That's also a sign, not necessarily of a struggle, but the distinction between the old Charlie and the new Charlie. And we also see in the subsequent paragraph that he's starting to acknowledge his own feelings. Here it says there were lots of girls and some men from the factory. I remember it, and they're referring to this get together that him and his friends had. Last night, Joe Carp and Frank Riley invited me to a party. There were lots of girls and some men from the factory. I remembered how sick I got last night. I drank too much. So I told Joe I didn't want to drink. That part is important. I told Joe I didn't want to drink. So he could have gone along with the crowd, but in this case now, remember, he's becoming increasingly intelligent. He's functioning in the superego. And even though there isn't necessarily a struggle, we see a distinction between the old Charlie and the new Charlie. That before, he's remembering things, and I drank too much, and so I didn't want to drink. So, and then he says he gave me a plain Coke instead. It tasted funny, but I thought it was just a bad taste in my mouth. So he's not doing what he doesn't want to do. So he's appeasing his it, but he's also addressing the superego. And so he's in the ego, right? And he's becoming more sensible now. The struggle is when he's in the superego, and when he starts to acknowledge his own feelings, and when he becomes brighter, that's when others eventually alienate him. I have to say that this last excerpt is a bit troublesome because this is when Charlie recognizes that these guys that he thinks are his friends aren't necessarily his friends. And so we take a look here in the very first few lines. It says, then when I got up, I saw the look on Joe's face, and it gave me a funny feeling in my stomach. So he's starting to feel he's starting to acknowledge these sentiments, these emotions, these feelings that he's had. He just screamed, one of the girls said, everybody was laughing. So he's realizing, wait a minute, something is not right here. And what I've accepted in the past is no longer acceptable for me. And this shows some sort of a struggle, whether it's one that he has internal, it's still a struggle. And if we look at the paragraph highlighted in green, it says, I didn't know what to do or where to turn. He wasn't sure what to do. Everyone was looking at me and laughing, and I felt naked. He felt like everyone could see his weaknesses. This wasn't a good feeling. This isn't something he acknowledged before. Remember in the text when they would laugh at him, he went along laughing along with them, and he thought it was okay. And now reality sets in, and it's no longer funny. And here are some of the things he wanted to do. I wanted to hide myself. I ran out into the street, and I threw up. Then I walked home. So we see him sort of struggling between the id, the super id, and the ego because, he wants to get away. He feels the nakedness. He feels the vulnerability, and he allows himself to leave. The last part that I'm highlighting here is now I know what it means when they say to pull a Charlie Gordon. This is a painful thing for him, right? This is a struggle. And of course, again, it reinforces this primary conflict. And the last thing it says is, I am ashamed. If this doesn't reveal the struggle, I don't know what else does. Now, this is progress report 11 all the way through the end of the text. And I want to give it to you now. I'm turning this over to you. I want you to sort of do the same thing. And it would be a good idea to go ahead and identify some of the conflict and the struggles that Charlie is experiencing. Pick out your examples because this is what's going to be on the assessment on Monday. You will be asked one body paragraph. It'll be the very same prompt. However, it will be narrowed down to just the remainder of the text. So from progress report 11 on will be your responsibility to pull out at least 3 solid examples that you feel very comfortable with from progress report 11 on through the end of the story, and you'll need to develop some sort of analysis. So think about that, and then you'll need to write it in class on Monday.